All right, I think it's about time. Why don't we get started? Good morning to those in the ROK and good evening to those in the US. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sejin Kim, Associate Director at the Center for Korean Innovation and Competitiveness at ITIF. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, US-Korea Trade at a Crossroads. How should Korea respond to the Trump-era tariff negotiations? So, as many of you know, back in April, the Trump administration proposed a 25% reciprocal tariffs on all Korean origin products. That's up from the current 10%. That 90 days deadline expires on July 8th, so just a few days from now. And that's put the Korean government in a really tough position. But beyond tariffs, there's a broader tensions at play on digital regulation, on platform access, on how US and Korea industrial strategies might converge or crash in the coming years. So today, we want to step back and ask, how can Korea approach these negotiations strategically, not just to avoid penalties, but to shape the more future-oriented trade relationship with the US? And how can it balance economic diplomacy with the domestic regulatory priorities, especially around the things like a Platform Fairness Act? That's what we want to focus on today. And thankfully, I have one of the most well-rounded set of panelists. First, my colleague Rob Atkinson, president of ITIF, who is one of the most influential voice in innovation and industrial policy. He advised on multiple U.S. administrations, and his recent work focuses on how nations like Korea can compete more effectively in a world of techno-nationalism. And next, Andy Kim, senior foreign attorney at Bae, Kim, and Lee, brings a legal lens to today's discussion. With experience spanning cross-border litigation, regulatory affairs, and international law. We also have Honorable Kyung-jin Song, who is a senior fellow at Korean University Asian Research Institute, with decades of experience spanning diplomacy, economic planning, and media. She brings a uniquely Korean police perspective to today's conversation. Finally, joining us today is Lella Kiss, senior policy analyst at the Schumpeter Project on Competition Policy, who specializes in digital platform and competition law across the US and Europe, which is especially valuable for competitive insights as a Korea-based platform regulation strategist. Thank you all so much for joining me. And then just quick reminder to everyone joining us at home, we'll take your questions and then you can submit them on Slido. The link is available on the screen. All right, so why don't we kick things off here, and then Rob, why don't you start us if you would? So Canada just rescinded its digital service tax on U.S. companies in response to Trump stopping negotiations. So how does that step suggest what Korea can do? And if a deal fails to materialize, what kind of impact would you expect on Korea export-driven economy? And which sectors do you think would it hit the hardest? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sejin. That's a complicated question, so I'll keep it sort of simple and brief. There's an important split, I believe, within the Trump administration, and ultimately, what only matters is what President Trump, actually thinks. But there are some in the administration, like Peter Navarro, who, at the end of the day, I think would like a tariff wall around America. And there are others in the administration, like Treasury Secretary Bessent and Commerce Secretary Lutnick, and I think actually President Trump himself, who see the Liberation Day tariffs as a negotiation tool. The United States, for many, many decades, certainly in the last decade, has been running very, very large trade deficits We've lost a lot of our manufacturing, some of it significant amount because of trade. And so this is an administration that says, yeah, enough is enough. We want to fix that. So I think at one level, the question is, who's going to win? Is it going to be the tariff wall people, or is it the tariff negotiation people? And I think the best thing for Korea to do, and I think actually what's real, is the tariff negotiation people will win. And we saw that just, maybe it was this week, I don't know, last week, very, very recently, where the president said to Prime Minister Carney in Canada, yeah, we're stopping all negotiations. We're just not doing it anymore. We're just going to go back to the whatever the Liberation Day tariff numbers are, because Canada has a digital services tax, which, go into all the details, certainly violates international tax law. But more importantly for President Trump, it's a major irritant to America. It's basically taking tax dollars from the U.S. Treasury and moving them to the Canadian Treasury. And so he did that. And literally the next day, Prime Minister Carney announced, we've repealed that law. And please, let's get back to having negotiations. And now they're back to having negotiations. I think if they hadn't done that, I don't think Trump would have negotiated. I think he would have just said, "Forget it, man. We're gonna have high tariffs," and eventually the Canadians would have caved. But they saw the writing on the wall. I think it's very similar for Korea. I honestly believe, particularly the fact that Mr. Trump did renegotiate KORUS in his first term, so I think he has some level of commitment there, and I think he wants to have a deal. I mean, that's what, Trump is all about, the art of the deal. And I think he would like to say, of all these countries he's negotiated, he got, 28 deals that are great for America, win for America. And that doesn't mean that Korea has to give up everything. Trump doesn't make deals that way, but it does mean to me that I think the Korean government should come towards the U.S. negotiators, including Jamison Greer at USTR, with some good things to offer, and we can talk about what those things would be. But I think, just to close, if they don't do that, I don't see any reason why Trump would not say, "Fine, we'll go to those 25% tariffs." I don't think he cares, but yeah, sure, 25% tariffs, that's fine. It'll be better for our auto industry. Fewer Hyundais. Fewer chip semiconductors. Yeah, it's fine. We'll be fine. So I really think he thinks that. So it's one of those things. There's a whole thing of in nuclear power thing. It's like the who's craziest kind of thing. And I don't want to say Mr. Trump is crazy, but I think he doesn't care. I think he's like willing to do it. So why not?
Yeah, that's a great point. So then if a deal failed to materialize, so do you think, so which sectors do you think would be hit the hardest? I mean, you already mentioned Hyundai, but could you tell me more about that?
It's interesting. Samsung has brought a case in the United States International Trade Commission against BOE, which is a Chinese display company, which is aggressively trying to take LG and Samsung market share, particularly in high-level OLEDs, and they've stolen their technology. It's a case that we fully support. So if the ITC doesn't rule in their favor, and we put a 25% tariff on all the dishwashers from Samsung, all the displays from Samsung, you're going to see a significant increase for Chinese products, assuming that he doesn't put a higher tariff on China. So I think that you'd see that in the electronics that Korea is so good at and specialize in. You'll certainly see a big impact in autos, and you'll certainly see an impact in semiconductors, although perhaps a little bit less there. But Samsung sells a lot of semiconductors, as does SK Hynix, to the U.S. market, and certainly other companies that sell different products to Korea. I think for the U.S., they'd just be like, well, if companies will say, well, if I can't get the Korean product, if it's 25% price increase, I'll go with the Taiwanese product, or I'll go with the Chinese product, or whatever it might be.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it seems like a tough position for Korea. So then let's flip it. Let's imagine a deal does happen. Kyungjin, so what kind of trade-offs or concessions do you think might be on the table?
Let me begin by saying there is a lot of complementarity between Korea and the United States. You know, the United States is the global technology leader, but may not be the advanced manufacturing leader, while Korea is a manufacturing powerhouse with advanced technologies. And, three objectives of Mr. Trump's tariff trade negotiations include correct trade imbalance and manufacture more in the US and reduce excessive government deficits. So, with that in mind, one thing any economy, any business hate most is uncertainty. And we have so many uncertainties around us stemming from tariff negotiations. And for example, Korean businesses predict that their exports for 2025 will likely drop 4.9% if the current tariff policy remains as it is. So businesses are very much concerned because the United States is our second largest trading partner, accounting for 15.2% of Korea's total trade. 18.7% of Korea's exports goes to the United States, and 11.4% of our imports come from the United States. And Korea has been the largest investor in the United States since 2020, averaging $26.9 billion every year, aligned with Korea's intent to strengthen its global supply chain resilience. So what is most important now is Korea and the United States finalize the tariff negotiations underway as soon as possible, and this is very important, and with a mutually beneficial deal. And if the two countries cannot finalize the deal by July 9, by the way, Secretary Rubio will be in Seoul next week, around 8th or 9th of July. The two can agree on an interim deal and continue the negotiations to iron out any differences and clarify the terms of the deal. For better outcomes of the Korea-US tariff negotiations, Korea, I think, should make efforts to reduce non-tariff barriers, such as the digital services tax and the online platform regulation. In fact, the Korean government yesterday announced no further discussion on the online platform regulation. And also, I think scrapping the digital tech services tax, the so-called Google tax, scheduled to be introduced in 2027, will also be a good step in the right direction. Export restrictions on the so-called Google Map, high-resolution map data, is another issue on the table, and I think it will be made more flexible down the road. A study was commissioned in May by the relevant government agency, toward this end. But of course, I'm sure there will be questions and resistance about digital sovereignty from within. So be expected. That's part of the process of business as usual. So my overall impression is that the Korean government does not want the online platform regulation or other digital issues to hurt the Korea-US trade tariff negotiations. For Korea, its top priority is ensuring more favorable tariff rates and also zero tariffs on its autos and auto parts, steel, and aluminum. And I think it would be fantastic if the two sides can secure a deal, zero tariff deal on steel and autos. US and the UK agreed on zero tariffs on the UK steel, right? So then Koreans will be greatly appreciating it, including the public. And Korea will likely buy more natural gas from the US. And like I said at the beginning, there's a great deal of complementarity between Korea and the United States. Shipbuilding is a sector where the ROK US complementarity works perfectly. Cooperation ranges from, MRO, maintain, repair, and overhaul, to manufacturing of icebreakers and tankers. Collaboration is already taking place. Korean companies have made good investments in the US shipbuilding sector and already in operation. And it's a good example of ROK US partnership that meets not just the economic question, but also a strategic question. In other words, an economic security question. And also in semiconductors, especially AI semiconductors, there are only two countries in the world that have full stack development capabilities, Korea and China. Of course, the United States has the software capabilities, but you lack the hardware manufacturing capabilities. So I think this presents a great opportunity for the two countries for another very meaningful and feasible partnership. And in this tariff negotiations, we have this issue of beef, a long-standing issue. Import of 30-month-old and older beef. In the United States, it accounts for, the 30-month-old and older beef accounts for only 5% of the total US beef production. So in an economic sense, it is insignificant. But the issue is more political and emotional than economic in both countries. There is a lot of sensitivity over this issue of beef. Some 15 years ago, the import of US beef could easily become a material for an anti-US sentiment. Now it's gone. Now, everyone enjoys the US beef. The public sentiment toward the US is much more favorable today. But once you touch this beef issue, 30-month-old and older beef, it has a great potential to become a tinderbox of anti-US sentiment. So here's a dilemma and predicament posed to political leadership in both countries, especially to the political leadership in Korea. No elected leaders can afford to go against the public sentiment, right? So if anyone has a brilliant idea to solve this dilemma, please do enlighten us. Please do share it with us. We'll be greatly appreciating it. And so at the end of the day, the tariff negotiations could pave the way for a future ROK-US technology partnership in sectors such as biotech, quantum computing, SMRs, aerospace and space, and joint R&D, among others.
Cindy, can I just say something to respond to Kyung Jin's point? That's why I think this is so important that our two countries, our leaders, get this resolved. Because as you pointed out, there's so much complementarity. There's so much areas of cooperation in technology and other things. And we the elephant in the room is obviously China, and it would be a tragedy if we can't solve this. But I understand the certain sensitivities on each side. So I really think this hopefully can and should, well, definitely should be solved. Hopefully it will be solved.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that brings and then that brings us another area that has been quietly building pressures, digital trade. So let's turn platform regulation. So there's been talk in the US about Korea Online Platform Fairness Act being seen as a non-tariff barrier, even a digital trade irritant. So Andy, so how central is this legislation in ongoing US-Korea discussions on digital trade? Is this something that's actively shaping talks in behind the scenes?
Um, yes, absolutely. It's been the past couple months and past couple days even. We've seen a lot of whipsaws in terms of the digital regulation efforts. It's this whole thing has been interesting, but it looks like that for the time being that things may have settled down because as Professor Song noted, the Korea does not seem to be interested in becoming the next Canada. So just a little bit of background on the Korean digital efforts to regulate the online platforms. Korea's been a bit of a leader in this area. Back in 2021, South Korea was one of the first companies to pass an ex-ante rule that required app stores to allow third-party payment services. This was obviously a direct attack at two prominent American companies, Apple and Google, because it turns out that the small and medium enterprises that make most of the apps in the world, they don't like paying 30% of all their revenues to Apple and Google. But I think that the Korean experience helped demonstrate some of the perils of ex-ante regulation. They did get rid of the 30% tariff, so the 30% fees, but Apple and Google pretty much immediately replaced the 30% fee with a 26% surcharge for third-party payment processors. So you can use a third-party payment processor, but after a 3% credit card tax, then you're basically the same place that you were before. That said, Korea has been various forces within Korea, including in the legislature and the KFTC, the Korean Fair Trade Commission. They have been very concerned about online regulation. And so there's been a few separate attempts to pass essentially European DMA style regulations. Now, right now there are 16 proposals that are being pushed around the legislature, but they vary in degrees. But they're mostly aimed at like four major issues. So one of them is of course the issue of tying and bundling. Where the online platforms use their dominance in one product to make other people buy other products. Self-preferencing, where they're pushing their own products, multi-homing, and most favored nation requirements. The DMA that was passed in Europe helps regulate and kind of outlaw a lot of these practices. But Korea has taken a little bit more of a cautious approach. They haven't passed these rules yet. And every time that something starts getting more serious, then there's a lot of outcry. And not just from the places that you might expect. So the last time, a couple of years ago, when they were trying to pass DMA-style regulations, then it went to a full halt pretty quickly, in part because the U.S. Chamber of Commerce didn't like it, in part because of Apple and Google. But small and medium businesses are also really not so happy about these things. For example, small businesses, most of them like bundling. Most of them don't want to have to go out and pick 16 different apps and figure out how to connect them themselves. Let's see. So the current bill right now, it was introduced last year, by Representative Kim Nam-gun of the Democratic Party. When he introduced the bill, he was in the opposition party. Then we had a little bit of a martial law thing, a little impeachment, a new election, and suddenly Representative Kim was part of the ruling party. And so it looked like everything was moving full force ahead with KFTC and the president and the legislature aligned. But then the United States started voicing some of its concerns, and it looks like the Korean government is going to be backing off that for now.
Yeah, that's very clear. Thanks, Andy. So it's just now about the law, and it's also about how it's being messaged and perceived, right? So Lila, building on that, how is it connected to broader U.S. concerns over platform market access?
Thank you, Sejin. It's very important to place this debate in the proper context. And of course, it's important to acknowledge the recent developments as well. As the Korean government's decision to pause or set aside this sweeping platform regulation issue is very encouraging as a signal in the current geopolitical environment. It shows a pragmatic recognition that in today's environment, digital regulation is not just a domestic matter, it also shapes perceptions of Korea as a reliable economic partner in the global sphere. Platform market access remains still a litmus test for Korea and how Korea treats key partners and allies like the United States. The US view is shaped by experience. Over the past decade, the KFTC have taken enforcement actions that disproportionately impact American companies like Google, Apple, Meta, Uber, General Motors. Just to mention a few concrete examples, the KFTC imposed a $100 million fine on Coupang for standard product placement algorithms, and Google and YouTube also face regulatory scrutiny over platform integration and network usage fees. In addition, we can mention Qualcomm's long-running battle with the KFTC that illustrates this dynamic pretty well. The company was hit with a record of $844 million fine by the KFTC for allegedly abusing its market position in patent licensing and modern chip assets. We should mention that President Lee Jae-myung's plan is to expand the Korea Fair Trade Commission with a new bureau, a new internal platform bureau, specifically tasked with targeting perceived monopoly power of foreign companies. And this is being perceived as a clear signal of market access risk as well. The formally proposed Online Platform Monopoly Act, modeled on the Digital Markets Act of the European Union, did and would escalate these concerns further by imposing these so-called ex-ante restrictions on dominant platforms, many of which happen to be American. The point here is not that the US companies want a preferential treatment in Korea, but to notice the discriminatory treatment against American companies. Couple of further examples here. ITIF's Trade Imbalance Index published in March this year ranked Korea as the 13th weakest country in terms of barriers to US exports and investors, explicitly citing digital economy rules modeled after the DMA as a major concern. In this environment, Korean digital regulations were and are no longer seen as purely domestic policies, but they are viewed as de facto non-tariff barriers that restrict market access for American companies. The Congress, through Rep. Miller's US-Korea Digital Trade Enforcement Act, have made it clear that such measures are being treated as non-tariff barriers and perceived as undermining digital market access for American firms. In addition, just today, over 40 members of the Congress formally called on the Trump administration to push back against South Korea's proposed Platform Competition Promotion Act, the PCPA, warning that the legislation would unfairly target American companies while giving a free ride for Chinese counterparts, undermining both American and Korean interests. So simply put, the market access question has become a proxy for whether Korea is treating the United States as an economic and technological partner. And Korea stepping back from the PCPA is a good opportunity, not only to avoid unnecessary friction, but to reset the narrative on this matter.
Thanks, Lila. Super helpful. And let's stay with the Andy for a second. So do you think these concerns could materially affect the political momentum behind Korea's platform legislation? So whether in the KFTC or ruling party?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One thing that's really important to keep in mind is that when we're talking about the digital regulations, is that Korea is actually very different from the EU, Japan, and Canada. For the EU and Canada, a lot of this defense against the dominant American companies. But Korea actually has a vibrant digital ecosystem, and it has its own significantly dominant homegrown platforms. So when Korea from the beginning, when Korea started proposing some of these regulations of the dominant platforms, almost all the bills included not only Apple and Google, but also Coupang, which is basically the Amazon of Korea, Naver, the Google of Korea, Kakao, and Baemin, which is a huge delivery app that if you're ever in Korea, you should try it. And so because of this, the questions for Korea are a lot more complicated, I think. And so even though there's a populist push to regulate the big guys, Korea has been taking a bit more of a measured approach to these issues. But like we were saying before, as of a month ago, then the DMA style approaches had the support of a prominent Democratic Party leader who was in the same party as the president. One of the larger opposing bills was substantively quite similar in terms of regulating multi-homing and all the other DMA factors. And that was actually pushed by an opposition party person. So it looked like everything was moving forward, at least going to be moving to full deliberations. But in the past couple weeks, then we've had reports that the U.S. Embassy in Korea has been reaching out directly to lawmakers. The U.S. Trade Representative has had some pretty strong words to say. And right now, there's the President's Transition Committee that is trying to figure out what the president can do during the next 5 years, and what he needs to prioritize. And now, especially after Korea saw what happened with Canada, Canada, there wasn't that much downside for Canada with that bill. But with Korea, a lot of the regulators recognize that there is potential downside to passing these, certainly without more study. And so right now, the Ministry of Science is pushing some efforts in order to work towards self-regulation. Because the nice thing about self-regulation is that yes, the rules are being defined by the players themselves, but you can also make it so that you're avoiding some of the most harmful consequences. And Korea actually has a bit of a track record now of showing that self-regulation in the digital market can actually have positive effects and be effective. Some of these earlier cases are still being studied, but the early signs are pretty good.
Yeah, great insights. Thank you so much. Then Lila, so how should the Korean government balance its goals of digital sovereignty with the risks of trade retaliation?
Thank you, Sejin. To answer this very magical question, I think it's important to distinguish between three different dimensions of sovereignty. the political, the economic, and the strategic dimension of what sovereignty means. First, a couple of ideas about the political dimension. Digital sovereignty is fundamentally a political concept tied to a nation's right about deciding about its regulatory path. Every sovereign nation, including Korea, has the right to shape its regulatory environment and choose its partners and, of course, adversaries. But this is not what the Korean policymakers mean by sovereignty. The current political objective is seen as self-sufficiency of the whole digital economy supply chain rather than sovereignty, which is not a realistic goal as of now. Secondly, the economic dimension, which is about, in practice, about competitiveness, economic competitiveness. In Korea, American technology companies play an essential role in supporting the digital economy. US firms provide infrastructure, platforms, services that underpin critical sectors. For example, from cloud computing to e-commerce, we see a lot of great examples of how American companies collaborate with the Korean tech industry. Google's network infrastructure carries nearly 30% of the Korean internet traffic, enabling connectivity, innovation, global integration, just to mention this as an example. Third, the strategic dimension of sovereignty. Korea's alliance with the US is not only the foundation of its national defense, but it's also a critical pillar of the economic stability. Not to mention that US military presence is significant on the peninsula, including 28,000 troops stationed near the 38th parallel, providing a security umbrella for Korea. But this partnership extends far beyond defenses. US and Korea cooperation increasingly integrated across advanced technologies, semiconductors, shipbuilding, energy, and many more. If policymakers in Seoul still consider the trajectory of digital regulation, it is vital to weigh whether these new measures will enhance the Korean competitiveness or risk undermining this strategic partnership. And now, to respond to your question, I would say that a wiser approach to the Korean government would include not just pausing, but withdrawing all sweeping ex-ante preemptive regulatory proposals modeled on the European DMA, and focusing on targeted evidence-based enforcement of Korea's existing competition tools. And if they seem to be inadequate, they still can be modified before a brand new alien legal solution is adopted. And in the meanwhile, exercise political sovereignty to increase digital competitiveness, meaning strengthen domestic innovation, as well as reduce over-reliance on inefficient small and medium-sized enterprises, and deepen collaboration with advanced economies and economical allies in the US. So digital sovereignty should not mean digital isolation and breaking up strategic partnerships with the US.
Thanks, Lila. Let's zoom out a bit now and then look at the bigger picture. Rob, what steps should Korea realistically be prepared to take to bring the tariffs back down to that 10% baseline? Do you see, is there any room for a strategic give and take here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to understand about the Trump tariff or trade goals, and this may not be true of everybody in the administration, but I think it's true of a lot of the core people, is, there's a great line in the US back from the 90s when Bush was in, President Bush, potato chips, computer chips, what's the difference? This is George Bush the first, his chief economist reportedly said that. And I think for many in the Trump administration, they don't see a difference there. They're looking at one thing, which is the trade balance. Now, if I were Korea, I would not, the last thing I'd want to negotiate away is steel and autos. These are core, really important industries, semiconductors, other things were very, very important for Korea. You built them, through heroic efforts over the last 50 years. But, why not buy more of our rice and more of our oil? And, just why do you care about that? So I think the things that are easy I don't mean to say there's no problems, but easier to solve. Give them a win where they can say, you know what, we're, I know Kyung-Young, you mentioned beef, but I don't know, maybe there's some like labeling thing or who knows. But if Trump can say, man, our farmers in Nebraska and Iowa, we're going to be selling so much more crops to Korea. They're going to be booming. I mean, it'll be like the greatest thing ever, I think Korea should think about things like that. Another thing that I wrote recently in the Korea Times was maybe you could get I don't know what the fleet makeup of Korean Air is, if it's all Boeing or if it's a combination of Boeing and Airbus. But if it's a combination, just say, hey, our fleet purchases over the next 5 years is going to be all Boeing. They alienate the Europeans, but they're not going to do anything. The Europeans are they're paper tigers. They're not going to do anything. So I think Korea should think sort of strategically about that. Are there things that we can give the Trump administration that matter a lot, but aren't the core things that we really don't want to give up on? So I think that'd be a key. I mean, one of the things I mentioned in this, there's some things about, there's obviously the Google Maps thing. There's some issues, and the other thing, I mean, I know Korean trade negotiators know this inside and out, but if you go through and look at the USTR national trade estimates for the last year and look at Korea, and there's some stuff on there that's low-hanging fruit. I don't know, Kyung-Jin, I'd like to hear your comments on that. Maybe they're low-hanging fruit from my side, and they're not for Koreans. But I can't believe that everything on the NTE is equally worth defending in Korean interest. So that'd be kind of my view is, give up the ones that are less important and less critical to Korea's future.
Thanks, Rob. That's a great point. Then let's bring Kyung-Jin in the domestic angle. So based on what what direction do you think the new leadership will take on the platform regulation? So will this regulatory priority shift or soften Korea's position in ongoing trade discussions?
Thanks, Sejin. Before I respond to your question, let me respond to Rob's questions and Lila's comments and questions. Actually, I think the Korean government will agree to buy more aircrafts, and oil, import more oil and natural gas from the United States.
Oh,
So, there's
Goodness.
technical issues. Yeah. So Kyung-Jin is having technical issues, so we can just move on to the next question while he's figuring out. So that's really help. Yeah. So Rob, back to you. So if negotiations fail or tariffs go into effect, so then what kind of medium or long-term strategy should Korea be considering? Like a trade diversification or WTO channels or something else?
Yeah. By the way, one other thing that I would, really push in the negotiations, and I think Hyun mentioned this earlier. Korean companies have made either direct or I was going to say, Korean companies have made a lot of commitments, including direct investments now into the U.S. economy. I would really highlight that. I would say, by the way, just say, we're going to go and we're going to do an opening of this factory in Georgia or wherever it is. And the president, we want you to be there. And we want you to take credit for it. You're the one that got us to, this is all politics, of course. But I do think that's to use the pun, a trump card, because Korea is investing a lot in America, and a lot of it is in the heartland. I was talking to one company, they're putting a big facility in Iowa. These are important swing-ish states. And I think if the president could say, I'm the one that's getting this here, and that doesn't require really a lot of give on the Korean part. It's more just how do you sell it? How do you package it? How do you frame it? And how do you promote it? So.
Right. Sorry, I just had a technical technology glitch.
Welcome back.
Sorry about that. I just had a fat finger problem moment. Anyways, coming back to what I was talking about, Korea will. I think my view is Korea will agree to buy more aircrafts as well, on top of more natural gas and oil. But like I said, beef, rice. I mean, in the dollar sense, it's not much. It's insignificant. But it's a huge political and emotional issue in Korea. It's very tough for any political leader to touch on these issues. So, if we can narrow our differences on this between the United States and Korea, it will help tremendously and it will expedite the trade negotiations, in my view. And Lila mentioned pragmatism. The basic tenet, the basic principle, guiding principles, so to speak, the lodestar of this new administration is pragmatism. So I think, and I'm also expecting a lot of, adjustments, modifications along the way within the next 5 years. Just like we saw the sudden change, on their position on the platform, online platform regulation yesterday. So such things will happen more, I would surmise. And now, coming back to the question of Sejin about new leadership's stance on the platform regulation. I already mentioned, and Andy elaborated on this issue. I think the new government is taking a very cautious and a more flexible approach to the proposed online platform regulation. Expressing reservations openly that the Korean Fair Trade Commission's framework will likely hurt the Korea-US trade negotiations. And about the Fair Trade Commission, Lila, you mentioned the new government committee to expand the Fair Trade Commission. I'm not sure if they are really trying to expand the Fair Trade Commission and whether it will actually happen. And instead of the Fair Trade Commission's proposed online platform, as Andy said, the Telecommunications Business Act and the Platform Self-Regulation Act, under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Science and ICT, will be made more flexible and up to date via partial revision. These two laws are free from the issues of the US-Korea trade negotiations. So that's it from my side.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point.
John, can I ask you a question,
Yep.
and Andy as well, on this point of, one of the things when we've looked at the DMA or similar regulatory frameworks around the world, it's pretty clear it's harmful to big foreign companies, whether they're American or whatever. But it also seems like it's potentially harmful for domestic companies. And I'm just curious whether you agree with that and whether that narrative has been talked about in Korea. It's sort of seen like, well, we'll do this, then the Korean companies will help. But maybe the Korean platform companies themselves will be harmed, and it will help hurt their capability to grow and expand and do what they need to do.
Andy, you might like to answer, please?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's like I said, that really is what makes. I mean, there's been a lot of economists that have studied the DMA, and the effects on Europe, and there's a lot of, there seems to be a bit of consensus that they're not so great for Europe. But there's also, I think, a lot of scholars and economists and business people who say that it's just that those types of ex-ante regulations are just a bad idea for a place like Korea that has its own digital innovators that they want to be incentivizing. And so Korea, it affects not only the digital sector, but also just the consumers too. And so, I think I mentioned before that small and medium enterprises, they tend to like bundling. They don't, the price is the price, and by having a single source, then they're able to have apps and programs that work seamlessly. A lot of the public sentiment about the regulations is focused on just bad practices, the things that affect the consumers. So increased prices, or bad services. And but one of the things to remember is that Korea already has a lot of rules and laws that they can use to combat some of these actions. It's So one example, so in addition to the fact that ex post regulations can work, enforcement can work, I think Leela was talking about how Korea managed to throw down one of the most massive fines against a dominant platform for for what looked like some abuses. And they were able to do that under the existing rules, without creating new ex ante rules that we have to see what's going to happen. And so, but then one more thing to keep in mind is that, at least when we're talking about the consumers, that the dominant platforms and the ones that want to become dominant platforms, they have incentives to fix a lot of this stuff themselves. So, with the delivery apps, delivery in Korea is insanely fast and efficient. But there were complaints that were cropping up, and so the regulators gave the delivery apps an opportunity to self-regulate a little bit. And a year later, after a year of self-regulation, then they saw that, look, oh yeah, there's fewer complaints. Fewer complaints of orders not being delivered, or fewer complaints of orders not being delivered, fewer complaints of the platform not doing anything about it. And so, as we're evolving forward, especially when we're talking about the homegrown competitors, that the big guys, they're going to have to address certainly the consumer and a lot of the small business complaints if they want to maintain dominance. And for the up-and-comers, if they don't provide equivalent services and make sure that the consumers at least feel like they're being treated fairly, then they're just going to fail on their own.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy, and Kyungjin and Rob. So yeah, that's a great point. And the last question, this one is for all of you. So how can Korea balance digital sovereignty with avoiding the appearance of protectionism? And finally, how should Korea government talks about this to the public while still keeping things steady with Washington? So,
I'm just sorry to interrupt. I was going to also say, don't forget, we have a question from the audience, at least one there that was there.
Yeah, there's some audience. Yeah, so we have a time for maybe one quick questions from the audience as well. Okay. So here is one from Slido. So what lessons can Seoul learn from how Taiwan has so far approached U.S. tariffs? So the two have similar economies, with Taipei having been more open to U.S. demands. So Rob, yeah, do you want to take one?
I mean, I can do a quick response. I don't know, Kyungjin, if you have a comment on there, but I think it's twofold. One is, well, threefold. If we don't defend Taiwan, if there's an invasion, they're pretty hardcore. They're in a hard position. Obviously, our troops are already in Korea, and I don't think if we have a trade spat, there's going to pull them out. So I think Taiwan feels a little bit more vulnerable to the United States for protection vis-a-vis the PRC. I think second, they have less core interests. They don't have an auto industry. They don't really have a steel industry. And those are industries that Trump wants to build. And so you have an inherent tension right there with Korea. That tension doesn't exist in the same way with Taiwan. So the semiconductors, we need them. I mean, maybe eventually we won't need them as much, but for now we need them. So I think for them, it's just it's probably easier for them to make some concessions. They're not as core to their own economy and their technology as with Korea. There's some things Korea really has to fight for, and it makes the negotiations more difficult, I would argue.
Good points, Rob. The U.S. will need Korea as well for semiconductors, and like I said, Korea is the number one investor in the U.S. and followed by Taiwan, by the way, and Korea. Taiwan does not have the public who are as vocal as Koreans. So that makes huge difference in approaching to issues with the United States.
Absolutely. Korea's public is legendary for citizen participation. My firm's office is in the middle of the central business district. There's literally protests every day, and that was before all this stuff started happening. And so, but the nice thing about the Korean public, at least my sense so far, and from some of the leaders that I speak to, is that as Kyung Jun was saying, there is a bit of a sense of pragmatism to these negotiations. That a lot of Koreans, I think, understand that that the leaders might have to do a few things that maybe they were against, but it's not quite as central as like the auto industry or the overall tariffs or steel or things like that. Of course, you do want to stay away from the third rails like beef, because Koreans are in the U.S. The U.S. has literally forgotten all about mad cow disease. Koreans have not. But there's also there's so many other ways that Korea can try to appease. Appease may not be the right word, but to engage with the U.S. In ways that are favorable, that serve the interests of both nations. So right now, Alaska is pushing really hard on the natural gas pipeline project. The governor of Alaska was in Korea earlier this year. As Rob was saying, then there's a lot of investments that are going on in the U.S. And a lot of them a large portion of them are being directed into pretty red states. And the states themselves recognize that there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of opportunities for synergy by engaging with Korea as opposed to shutting Korea off. I think at last count, there was, I think, more like 2, maybe even 3 dozen states that have trade representatives in Korea. There are several counties, especially from Texas, that have a permanent office in Korea to help facilitate Korea-U.S. trade, or Korea-Texas trade, or Korea-Wilkinson County trade. There's a lot of heated rhetoric and a little bit of unpredictability going on, but I think that ultimately the fundamentals are there. Korea and the U.S. are better off when we trade well together. Mm-hmm. And I think that as long as we're able to move forward with more practical, pragmatic approaches, then I think that will end up coming out as even stronger than before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me briefly talk about the public sentiment issue in Korea, because I don't think any other countries have this strong a public sentiment issue as in Korea. Managing public sentiment in Korea is no simple question, especially Korea is a democracy and people enjoy it, and people enjoy their full right democracy gives. Public sentiment never goes unnoticed in Korea. If it can be it has to be handled very carefully, very cautiously, and as you've seen it, how Koreans reacted and responded to the illegal martial law on December 3 and afterwards. Koreans do not shy away from, expressing their views and concerns. And once the public sentiment is dealt with not in a proper way, it can quickly evolve into a tinderbox of a next big explosion. Unlike the United States and other big countries in terms of size, Korea is a small country with a heavy concentration of active population in and around Seoul. That means it offers a fertile ground, a conducive environment for collective actions. It's not the US, So communicating with the public is critical on the part of the Korean government, the political leaders, to keep the public updated with what's going on in the national affairs. In this case, with trade negotiations, and so that we can eliminate space for any misunderstanding and misleading information. To this end, I think more public hearings, press briefings, explanation sessions, etc., should be held domestically, and we should invite, external voices from the U.S. and other relevant countries as well.
Chungjin and Andy, to your point, I have to say, every time I come to Korea, I'm, I make an effort to walk around and not take a cab if I can get a little. Every single time I see some demonstration. In a park, in front of a building. I mean, it's just like constant citizen thing. So yeah.
Yes, and they all are very serious about what they're doing.
Yeah, they look like this isn't
Yes.
just like, hey, this is serious. Yeah,
Very,
absolutely.
very.
Yeah, a lot of
Yes.
emotion, commitment behind it. Yeah.
But one nice things that I've observed about Korean politics is that when they take this kind of passion and they start demanding change, and when they start forcing change, they generally do it. They generally take the time to do it in a reasoned, thought out manner, with hearings, with public comment, and I think as Kyunjin was mentioning, that process has already started with the new administration.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
All right. This has been an incredibly rich conversation. I think we've really unpacked how trade, regulation, and strategy are colliding in real time, and then what Korea's options might look like moving forward. I know we could probably go for another hour, but we are running out of time. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. And of course, thanks for everyone who turned in from home and the office. We hope you will join again the future conversation like this. Thanks again, and have a good rest of day and the evening wherever you're joining from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.